Action underway in this 2-5 game. We've got hundreds of dollars in front of us ready to put it to work, and we've got 8-7 of hearts that will help facilitate that. We're going to raise it up to $20 out of the cutoff before the button decides, let's get spicy. He makes it $75, 3-betting me. What is this? This is my own meetup game, and this is the way they treat me. I'm going nowhere. I make the call. Heads up to a flop that comes down queen, 6, 5, all clubs. That's the wrong color, but we do flop an open-ended straight draw. I check it to the aggressor, and that player on the button checks it back. Turn is an offsuit 10, which doesn't change anything. And considering 8 high is not going to win this pot, let's go ahead and take a stab at it. I bet $60 with my open-ender, which my opponent calls. River pairs the board. We're left with 8 high. We're going to have to fire at it. Checking is not going to work. Let's go ahead and make a wager. I bet $135. My opponent goes into the tank. We're thinking fold thoughts, but he decides on call thoughts. Unfortunately, we roll over our 8 high, and he shows ace king of spades, which is good. Unfortunately, we get wrecked in this hand. Ship it to that man. And by the way, that man is a very cool dude named Arjun, who was telling me about a rough skiing accident that he was involved in not too long ago. Seems like kind of a badass dude, honestly. Getting out there in life, making ace high call downs. Glad he's feeling much better, despite the fact that he's out here embarrassing me on the felts. Embarrassing, but that's okay. That's poker. Sometimes you get embarrassed. Let's move on. Next hand, hijack coming in for the raise up to $20, and we look down at the 8-6 of spades. Suited gappers, love them. Let's go ahead and put in a rage 3-bet. I make it $65 to go. Folds back to the player in the hijack, who makes the call. Heads up to a flop that gives us no help once again. Queen, jack, 4, rainbow. Backdoor potential though. Straight and flush draws, backdoor style. So when my opponent checks it over to me, we're c-betting for sure. I bet $45 back over to the man on my right, who puts us in our place once again. Check raising here up to $125. Don't think we want to float with just the 8 high in the back doors, so I'm going to let this one go. Give him credit, which was a mistake because my opponent shows us the 8-7 of hearts. We get wrecked in back-to-back hands here, first in the form of a hero call and now in the form of aggression. We had very similar hands here, 8 high with the backdoor draws, but aggression pays. Ship it to this man. And this time, this man is named Dan, and it's hard to get mad at these guys who keep wrecking me because they're such cool guys. Longtime viewers of the channel will remember Dan as the man who did the shoe bomb at the meetup game on the vlog from South Point Poker Room in Las Vegas. The bomb's going in the shoe. Oh man. All right, buddy. Go get him. Oh yeah. Oh, delicious. Shoe bomb, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so the suited connectors and gappers not exactly working out for us. Let's try and make something happen with a real hand. In this hand, there's an early position raise to $20. There's one call before action over to us looking down at pocket kings. Finally, let's go ahead, bump this one up to $80. Back over to the initial raiser who makes the call, and the player in between also calls. So we've got an inflated pot going 3 ways to a flop. Queen, 9, deuce, rainbow gives us the overpair. Love to see no ace on the flop. 2 checks over to me, of course, for wagering. I bet 1/3 the size of the pot, $80. Player in early position folds before the player in between once again wants to play for more money, this time up to $250. I've only got maybe about $550, and we've got an overpair in a 3-bet pot. All that is going to add up to us sending all of the money into the middle. All right, all in. Let's play for all of it, sir. I've got the goods this time, and my opponent says,
oh, if you have top set, you have it. I have middle set. That's a good hand.
The overpair, no good. So we get stacked in this hand. Not going well. Not going well here so far. We are well in the hole already. These first 3 hands, none of them go our way here, putting us into the hole in the meetup game. And not only that, we get plastered on Instagram here in this photo. You know, you got to be a good sport here. You got to play along with the people. You got to give them what they want. Go ahead, put it on Instagram. I'll repost it. No problem, sir. We're all here for a good time, and apparently you guys are all here for my money. that's fine. And just real quick, guys, need to check out these 2 tweets because Brad and I have not one, but 2 packages to give away to the WPT World Championships happening in December at Wynn Las Vegas. These contests cannot be easier to enter, so check them out. Links in the description box. All right, in the meetup games, things tend to get crazy occasionally, and this is going to be one of those occasions because this time we're no longer playing 2-5. We're now playing 2, 5, 10, 20, 40. That is the triple straddle. That is going to give us approximately 20 big blinds or so to work with a $40 straddle on. So when action folds over to me in the small blind, looking down at pocket 9s, could do a couple things. We could just open, rip it in there. It's not that many big blinds, but let's go ahead and put in a different size raise. I decide on $160 here out of the small blind. The player in that last straddle, he goes ahead and makes the call. So heads up to a flop that comes down 10-7-6 rainbow. All things considered, I think this is a pretty reasonable flop. Just the 1 overcard. We've got a straight draw to go along with our pocket pair. And so I'm going to lead out for those reasons. Again, not very deep here with a $40 straddle on. I go ahead and bet $110. My opponent thinks for a little bit, and he makes the call. Not going to leave us too many options here, and looking for a relatively safe card. And I think we get that on the 5 of hearts, second heart on the turn. We've only got $370 left, so we have a very easy decision here. Just going to go ahead, rip the 370 in there, and pray we don't hear the snap call right after, which we do not. My opponent goes into the tank, thinks for quite some time before deciding to fold what he would later tell me is pocket 4s, which actually ends up being a great fold considering the fact that he turned an open ender. The top end of that open ender was no good, of course, because we have the pocket 9s and we would make it 10 high straight if the 8 comes. And so considering that we are so shallow, as mentioned, he loses about the minimum I think he could with the pocket 4s because we were going with it. We finish up the meetup game at a 5-10 table in which myself, Brad, and Ethan all grabbed a seat in. I think we all played on the same table at the lodge once before, but this is a pretty rare occasion, and here we are all at the 5-10 table. But I don't have too much to report from this day in particular. There was one interesting hand where I opened pocket 3s to $30 out of the cutoff. The button goes ahead and 3-bets it to $100, and the big blind puts in the 4-bet up to $350. Unfortunately, we're going to have to get out of there with our small pocket pair because we still have the button behind us who was putting an aggression. Can't just cold call the 4-bet, so I make the fold with the 3s. And a very long story short is that not only would we have flopped a set, but we would have rivered quads versus the pocket aces of the big blind who put in that $350 4-bet. Again, nothing we can do. It's definitely some results-oriented thinking, but what might have been, had we stuck in there, seen a flop, we would have gone nowhere, and we would have ripped quads for a $6,000 pot or something, or who knows. All right, one last cute little hand here from this 5-10 game. I go ahead and raise the ace queen of clubs up to $30 out of the cutoff. The button calls and the big blind calls. So a 3-way affair heading to the flop, which comes down 9-4 deuce rainbow. Big blind checks, I'm going to check it, and the button checks back. Turn is jack of spades, second spade. Big blind checks again. Don't think there's any point in betting here. I check it, and once again, the button checks. River completes the backdoor flush on the 9 of spades, and now the big blind bets out for $30. I think he's going to find some bets with flush draws on the turn, and I'm not sure what he's value betting here because he would also bet a jack on the turn, probably. Maybe he's going for very thin value, but I'm a curious cat. So I go ahead and toss in the $30. Button behind me makes the call as well, which is a bad sign. The big blind rolls over king 7 offsuit. We can beat that. I show my ace queen. And the button flashes an ace, shows us the ace, and then goes ahead and mucks his 2 cards. He makes the overcall with an ace high that is worse than the ace queen. We go ahead and scoop this little pot here to wrap up the day. All right, guys, the meetup game is a wrap. I'm just doing an outro illuminated by these slot machines. That's why my face is changing colors. But meetup game here at Playground is a wrap. It was a very fun one. It was not a profitable one for me. That's okay. We only lost this amount of money, which is not a big loss. And it was very much worth it to come back here to Playground in Montreal and see a bunch of very friendly faces. Seeing as how we were currently in the hole for our trip to Playground in Montreal, and there's 5-10 action to be found, that to me makes the most sense to try and recoup our losses. Let's go ahead, move up in stakes, Maybe they'll respect our raises up there. Let's go ahead and find out. We're playing 5-10 here. We are in the game for the maximum $2,500 buy-in. Let's check out some 5-10 hands. And in this one, the button comes in for a raise up to $30 before we look down at the ace deuce of clubs in the small blind. Let's 3-bet it. Button's a wide range. We've got an ace, removal to strong hands, and some post-flop playability. So I make it $150 to go out of the small blind before the big blind puts in the cold call and the button gets out of the way. So we are now playing out of position versus the big blind rather than the button. And we go heads up to a flop of queen 9-3 with 2 clubs. Good news, bad news. Good news is we flopped a nut flush draw. Bad news is that these middle to high card flops are probably going to be pretty good for a cold calling range. I think he's usually going to have hands such as queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s maybe. With that being the case, I go ahead and check to the big blind, who bets $175. Considering that we have a pretty good hand here, we could either check call or we could check raise. Let's put in the latter. Let's use aggression. I would take this line with pocket queens, maybe some pocket aces as well. Gonna go ahead and check raise here to $450, which my opponent calls, which is a very bad sign. Turn pairs the board on an offsuit 9, which is kind of interesting. Now it's less likely that he has pocket 9s, but he could still have pocket queens and maybe even better than that. With the board being paired now, flush draw less attractive, so I go ahead and check it again, and this time my opponent keeps firing somewhere to the tune of $550, and we're just gonna have to abandon ship here. Go ahead and make the fold. All right, the straddle gets on for the rest of these hands, now playing 5, 10, 20. And in this hand, the first player to act goes ahead and raises it up to $60. And we're on his direct left, looking down at pocket aces, the best hand ever created. And I'm gonna get a little bit tricky here. I'm gonna go ahead and put in the flat call, set in the trap. Usually ranges are incredibly narrow when it's UTG versus UTG1. Set the trap here, see if we can let someone fall into it. Player on my left calls, and sure enough, the player on the button goes ahead and falls into our trap with a 3-bet up to $325. Of course, we're looking for even more action, but unfortunately, the under the gun player gets out of the way. Now it's all up to us to go ahead and generate that action. I'm going to go ahead, put in the back raise. I make it $800 to go. Perhaps I'm a little unbalanced here, and there's not too many bluffs I'm going to find in this spot, but that's okay because it's live poker. The player on my left gets out of the way, and the button checks his cards before deciding to unfortunately fold. So no additional action to be found, but we do entice the button with what was probably a bluff, and we profit a little over $400 or so pre-flop. Switch tables off of that first must-move game and into another 5, 10, 20 situation where we look down at pocket 3s. I go ahead and raise it up to $50 before the player in the straddle spot makes the call. Heads up to ace 7-3 rainbow. That's a favorable one, giving us bottom set. Straddle checks. We're going to wager some money. I decide on $30, which the straddle spot agrees to. Turn pairs the board on another 7, giving us a full house. Seems pretty good. Most likely my opponent either had an ace or a 7 on this board, and if he made trips, that'd be fantastic. He checks it. I'm going to fire again. I wouldn't bet too big here. If I had a hand like ace king, I would probably bet something small-ish, maybe get to showdown, and I would often check back on this turn as well. So I decided on a sizing of $40 here in this instance with my bottom full house. Good news is that my opponent makes the call. River is a 5. He checks it over to me one more time here. Let's go for a bunch more value now. I ramp it up to $175, looking for a call, but we get some different news that is interesting. My opponent check raises very quickly up to $400. Definitely an interesting spot here. We don't have the nuts, but I feel like we likely have the best hand here a lot of the time. Seems unlikely that my opponent would have pocket 5s. Maybe he could have 7-5. He could have a lot of 7x. And I don't think he'll have ace 7 all that often, because I think he would probably check raise that hand on the flop some decent percentage of the time facing a down bet. The other part of the equation is whether we can get value from worse. Can we get value from a hand like 8-7 suited? I think it's definitely possible. It doesn't seem outside of the realm of possibilities here. On top of that, I just wouldn't be able to sleep if I don't put in a 3-bet here. Just be way too nitty, I think, to just call this check raise here on the river. It's not that big of a check raise either. I'm going to go for some more money, targeting 7x. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to $975 here. Looking for a call. Don't want to see a snap jam all in. That would be a little bit sketchy. But after my opponent thinks about it for quite some time, over a minute of in the tank, he eventually decides to let it go. Later telling me he had an ace. So if he was thinking about it for that long with just top pair, Gotta imagine there was more value to be gotten if he happened to have a 7. All right, in this next day, we're going to get a little bit spicy here. $20 straddle is on, and the cutoff makes it $60 to go. We're in the small blind looking down at 7-6 of hearts. Flatting out of the small blind seems not great. Seems good to have some suited connectors in the mix for some board coverage. So let's go ahead and put in the 3-bet with this one. I make it $260 to go. The big blind makes the cold call in this spot, and the cutoff is also going nowhere. He makes the call as well. So 3 ways to a flop that comes down ace, 5, deuce with 2 hearts, giving us a flush draw plus a backdoor straight draw. All things considered, that's a pretty fantastic flop. So we're going to go ahead and represent the ace. I continue for a sizing of $225. Think about it, we're going to have a lot of good hands on this board, not just ace king, ace queen, pocket aces. We're also going to have ace 3 suited, ace 4 suited. That gives us top pair plus a straight draw. All sorts of things that we can represent during those times where we happen to have 7 high like we do here. Player on my left in the big blind, he gets out of the way. The player in the cutoff, he's not convinced yet. He tosses in the call. So heads up to a flop that comes down an offsuit king, which is another good card for us. This board is great. We're going to be the only one that is going to have ace king here for the most part. Aside from pocket 5s and pocket 2s, we're going to have all the strongest hands in this spot. So all that adds up to another wager, in my opinion, from us. This time I size out $650, and we see a snap fold from my opponent, which is great news. As you can see, we've got 7 high. So when you can win the pot, take it down with 7 high, that's a good feeling. And feels good to wrap up the session on a high note. Booking a win here in the 5-10, usually 20 game. Not a massive win. We do win the losses back from the 2-5 meetup game. Book a win today of about $900, which is good to get us into the green for the trip.